Welcome. Welcome to our kitchen table, which stretches from Warsaw to New York, and I think at least halfway around the world, or perhaps all around the globe. I'm Elise Lieberman, the director of the Toby Center for the Renewal of Jewish Life in Poland. And I'm very pleased that you've all joined us for this very special TJHD Talks in a special partnership with the Polin Museum of the History of Polish Jews and its annual TISH Food Festival. And now it's my pleasure to introduce a dear friend and colleague, Magdalena Maślak, the founder and coordinator of the TISH Jewish Food Festival. Magda, it's lovely to share the table with you. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Hello, everybody. Today is the first day of the third edition of TISH Jewish Food Festival. And the main theme of the festival is closeness. And today we will talk about being close and staying close, especially in these difficult times that we are having right now, like pandemic times. And we are having today really extraordinary guests. So just not to make it longer, I would like to introduce Joy Levitt is the executive director at JCC in Manhattan. Hello, Joy. And
hi there, how are you all?
And Katja Goldman, the co-author of the Community Table Cookbook and the unofficial Challah teacher of the Upper West Side. Hello, Katja.
Hi, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you. And our great moderator, the Ronald Lauder, chief curator of the core exhibition at Polin Museum of the History of Polish Jews, Barbara Kirschenblatt-Gimblet. Hello, Barbara.
Hi there.
Okay, so not to take time of this meeting, I would give the voice to Barbara and to start the meeting.
Thank you very, very much. Well, first of all, we're absolutely delighted to have this opportunity to have a conversation with Joy Levitt and Katja Goldman. I especially want to thank Elise Lieberman and Jakub Lisiak and the Toby Center in Warsaw for being our partner. They are doing really wonderful work and have been for many, many, many years, and partnering with them is a tremendous pleasure, and they're providing really extraordinary resources in support of this conversation. Now, the starting point for this conversation was a cookbook in my collection. And it is, it's a JCC cookbook. It was organized by the Manhattan JCC, and it is in the general genre of community cookbooks. Many of them are charity cookbooks intended to raise funds. And I have hundreds of them, but I have pride of place for the community cookbook and for what it represents. And I thought we'd get our conversation started by inviting Joy to say a few words about how this cookbook represents the core values and the mission of the Manhattan JCC. And then we'll actually turn to a short video, which will connect us with Katja. Joy, do you want to say a few words?
Sure, thanks, Barbara, and thank you, Elise, and all of our friends that are helping connect us and reminding us just how small this world is. Full disclosure, for all the reasons you just said, I sort of didn't want this cookbook to happen. I thought it was going to be another spiral bound, a lot of, chicken with French dressing, and you'll hear more from Katja and Judy and Lisa. They were determined to express our 10th anniversary as an institution with all the values that we hold dear about bringing people together, about the role of food in Jewish holidays and in Jewish life and in Shabbat. And they also, I think, very much wanted to express the marriage between this very deep value of community with the new ways in which we're thinking about food, both from the perspective of sustainability and health. And these ideas were brought into the imagination of the cookbook in ways that I think make it pride of place for me as well.
And as I understand, cooking is part of the program at the JCC.
So the Patty Gellman Culinary Studio at the JCC is the only kosher cooking school in New York City. And again, it is in a way a microcosm of all of our values. The people who come to this class come from all ages and stages. We have little kids making challah with their grandparents. We have young adults coming and meeting other young adults over food and often a glass of wine. And you get to meet people in those classes that you probably wouldn't meet under any other circumstances, but we get to meet them over food.
And as I understand, although it's a JCC, a Jewish Community Center, it's open to everybody.
The JCC is shaping 21st century Jewish life, which, as we all know, is multifaceted, multicultural, and we, as you'll see in the cookbook, and has been true of Jewish cooking forever, and Barbara, you know this better than all of us, we've always benefited from being engaged in the culture that surrounds us and to bring in that culture into our unique way of eating.
Wonderful. Well, I think as a way of transitioning to a discussion of the cookbook and talking with Katja, let's show the video of the launch of the cookbook, because it's a very joyous, festive launch of a real achievement.
We haven't seen this in a long time. We are celebrating the magnificent launch of the community table, recipes and stories from the JCC in Manhattan and beyond. And mostly it represents imagining how to express the values of the JCC and its mission in a cookbook.
We started out with a very broad base of what we wanted to do, and we started culling recipes from the community, from the cooking school, then working and tweaking our own recipes.
It's modern and it's contemporary, and it's pretty much, reflects how cooking is in New York in general. And
we kept asking ourselves, with everything that's available online, why is anyone going to buy a cookbook? And there's something about physically holding a book, turning the pages, the photography. You can't do that when you take a recipe offline. So I think there's a big need for cookbooks to continue in the tradition.
I would strongly recommend the chocolate brownie cookies with sea salt. They might be the best cookie I've ever had.
There's also a great lentil soup that became our item that we'd have when we'd have long cooking days. We always had the lentil soup on hand to be lunch as we were working and cooking.
It's healthy, it's organic, it's fresh, it's out of everybody's gardens. And I think this is going to be a really integral part of the many, many aspects that the JCC plays in people's Jewish lives.
I think that really is a perfect, absolutely perfect segue.
Wow, Katja, we haven't seen that since the book came out, right?
But
exactly.
It's perfect. It's absolutely perfect. Now, what I want to do, as we begin to talk with Katja, I just want to say that at the very, very back of the community cookbook, there's a lovely moment. And it's called, first of all, it's an excerpt from Katja's speech at the JCC Manhattan's annual benefit in May 2012. It's only an excerpt. I'm eager to actually read the whole thing, but it's a beautiful excerpt, and it is a recipe for a community center. And as I understand it, Katja, maybe you will tell us what happened after you made this speech.
Right after I made it, well, first of all, I wasn't so comfortable with giving a speech. And this is a collaboration with Joy of coming up with this idea of just tell the story of the JCC, since I was involved with it very early on, of how it came to be at the 10th anniversary celebration. And I did it in the form of a recipe of listing the ingredients that you need, inspiring people, a community, a corner. Then you have to add a director, you have to move it to rise. And so when I finished mixing it and creating it and discussing how you just, and let it rise, and then you punch it down and you work it some more, and then you go down a few more floors. I came down from from delivering it. And Judy Bunzl, who you just saw in the video, said to me, "That's it. That's it. We're absolutely doing a book for this 10th anniversary. We're absolutely doing it." And I kept saying, I had written another cookbook, and I said, you don't understand how much work this is. And we talked about it. And then I worked with Lisa Rotmil, who is a art historian and a great friend of mine. And she didn't know Judy. I said, just come to a meeting, And we got Lisa to be a part of it. And the three of us worked together on this for, I don't even know how long it was, but it was a couple of years where we would gather and just work together, discussing recipes, cooking together. It was like such a gift. The book is a gift to all of you, but it was a gift to us to be able to work together.
Well,
So-
you know, it's a very special book. And I say that knowing, because I know community cookbooks very well. And yes, most of them are very, I can understand Joy's reluctance, her hesitation. Most of them are cheaply printed, spiral bound. They're recipes that are given by members of the community. And also they're really a kind of like a clock of American Jewish, particularly suburban cooking. So whether it's tuna casseroles or it's, Jello salads or, whatever, mayonnaise, whatever it may be, it's a different universe. So I can well understand that the prospect of such a cookbook to represent the Manhattan JCC was absolutely not in the cards. And so this is of course a very beautifully, in terms of production values, it's very beautifully produced, but also it's a cuisine that really, I would say, it's not only very New York, it's also very California. It's very farm to table, it's very healthy, it's very fresh, it's seasonal, it's local. But also I am intrigued by how Jewish it is and how not Jewish it is. And I wondered whether you might like to comment on it, Katja, and then perhaps Joy might like to say something.
Well, Lisa, Judy, and I all come from different sort of areas of being Jewish and different homes and styles of cooking. And when we came together, we wanted this book to reflect who's walking through the doors of the JCC and what we're eating and who they are. So it crosses cultural and our visions of how we eat now, but it also holds on to a lot of where we come from. So, Judy's mother-in-law is Viennese. I had Hungarian grandmother. There's a recipe for something called kedli. I called it nukanak, and I kept saying it's a Hungarian like spätzle. I kept saying we have to include nukanak, and Judy's like, "What is nukanak?" And then we made it. This is no kedli. So we brought a lot of where we came from and the influences from other people in the community, but it's also about how we're cooking right now. We're not cooking with Jello. We're buying things seasonally as much as we can. There's farmers markets. It's a reflection of our philosophy and how we feel about cooking. So
absolutely. And before I return to Joy, I just wanted to make some reflections of my own. So there, some of the memorable recipes, and I would say surprises, which I think is really wonderful for this kind of a cookbook to have in it at once familiar, but also some very interesting surprises. So let me cite two of them. So my personal favorites are the Sri Lankan matzo brie. Now, the idea of having a competition for matzo brie and then having a Sri Lankan entry and it makes its way into the cookbook, I just thought that was so much of our moment. Because there are latke contests, there are kugel contests. I don't know about bagels, but matzo brie. So that I thought, and actually I want to try and make it because I really think that
It's really good.
It's delicious.
absolutely
It's delicious.
But then the
You,
other
you eat it when it's not Passover. That's how you know how good it is.
exactly, and especially after Passover when you've got all that matzah left. But the other one that I found so interesting was the deconstructed tzimmus. Now, it was kind of like tzimmus reverse engineered. So what was it? It was essentially roasted root vegetables. And of course, a tzimmus traditionally, a tzimmus is a stewed carrots, usually to a mush, very, very soft, sweet, maybe with prunes, maybe with brisket, maybe with chicken. It's more like a pudding. But this one was done with roasted vegetables and I think oranges, orange juice. Absolutely stunning, beautiful, inspired by tzimmus, but not your grandmother's tzimmus. But I want to turn to Joy, and I want to ask you the same question. That it is it is at the same time a very Jewish cookbook, and at the same time not. And I'd just be interested in your thoughts.
Look, I think, we're living in very disrupted times in which what Jewish identity is really about is becoming, I think, redefined in a really wonderful way. As our community gets more multicultural and our experiences are deeper. So we're able to express that in our food instead of understanding Jewish cooking as Ashkenazi, chicken soup. And I don't want to diss chicken soup. I do want to say, while I'm on that subject, that I think Helen Nash is on this call. I hope she is. All of us have learned so much from Helen in terms of our cooking style. Helen has a great trick about making chicken soup healthily, which is when the soup is finished, put a paper towel, dampen a paper towel, stick it in the freezer for 2 minutes, bring it out, put it in your colander and strain your soup. The fat congeals on the paper towel.
Cold paper.
I'm sorry?
On the cold paper.
On the cold paper, and you get a clear, beautiful soup. That being said, we've learned so much from our friends in Israel. I know Smadar Ben Akiva from JCC Global is on this call. The foods around the world have inspired us. So I think Jewish cooking is how Jews cook, and the interaction of that experience with the holy days that we have throughout the year. Because let's face it, most of us are too busy to cook every day, although some of us, Katja and I have been talking about how this cookbook has saved us during the pandemic when we wound up cooking for many more people than we used to. But it's holiday time when we really spend the time to cook deeply, and being able to have those traditional favorites and also new things, I think, is what holds our families together.
No, absolutely. And, a couple of things that I found very interesting in this cookbook, and that is to say that it doesn't bill itself. It isn't what I would call aggressively or assertively would be a better word. It's not assertively kosher, but it is kosher. And it's kosher in a very, I would say, gentle and non-dogmatic way. And I think this is important, which is to say that it's not treif. That's how I'd put it. It's the not treif way of being kosher. Now, what does that mean? It means that it's very easy, and particularly with this farm to table and healthy way of cooking, that milk and meat are not mixed, for example, that pork and shellfish are not included, although there's another whole discussion as to whether a classic recipe really does call for bacon, and if you're so inclined, be my guest kind of attitude. But I think the idea, it is, the way I'd put it is that when food is kosher, it is the most inclusive. It sounds exclusive, but it's not, because what it means is that everybody can eat it. And that for me is actually, so it being kosher is for me a way of it being inclusive, but doing so in a very gentle and very, I would say, very easy way. That's the first thing. The second is that I thought it really interesting in the back of the book is that the recipes were classified as to whether they were milk or meat or neutral, that there were Passover recipes specifically. And then I also love the menus and the menu for Sukkot. Let me just share with you the menu for Sukkot, because I think this will give our listeners a little bit of an idea. And of course, I wanted to ask each of you, what are you going to make for Sukkot, particularly from the cookbook? But the menu for the meat dinner is crostini with 3 toppings, then a pickled string beans and baby carrots, very much of the season, then Cajun barbecue brisket.
You have not lived until you have made this brisket.
And of course, like brisket is de rigueur. And we know it has to be second cut, and that there's a whole way. Everybody has their favorite way, but I know, Joy, this is your go-to. Then there are roasted red pepper, tomato, and parsley salad, and a chocolate brownie. Your favorite recipes? True?
Well, some of them.
Some of them. I know your husband won't eat peppers, but some.
This is true.
Very, very nice dairy. You're given like an option. There's a kind of like a dairy lunch, and then there's a meat dinner. So, Katja, what are you gonna make for Sukkot from the cookbook?
I'm making the tomato soup and one of the crostinis to go with it, and then I was going to make a. It's just at the where I am in New York. It's just at the end, the last bits of corn and fresh like cherry tomatoes and tomatoes. So I'm making the pappardelle. It's called it's a late summer pasta dish, and then the salad everyone's go-to is chicken cutlets or chicken, and we presented 4 ways for each season of making different salads. So like the spring, it's shaved asparagus and a grilled chicken breast. And then we have delicata squash and different things. So I'm doing the fall salad without the chicken breast, and a homemade ricotta to go on the crostini. And then for dessert, before we went live, we were discussing cookies and desserts. And when Hanukkah and Thanksgiving, which is an American holiday of harvest festival, happened on the same day a couple of years ago, we came up with a pumpkin rugelach recipe, which is really delicious. It's instead of using a jam, you use a pumpkin puree and spices. So that's one night of Sukkot.
Oh my God, that sounds absolutely wonderful. And you know what strikes me as I'm thinking about this is that I think that this cookbook's a 21st century version of the most popular Jewish cookbooks of the 19th century. And let me explain why. The most popular Jewish cookbooks of the 19th century were actually published in German, and were published in and mainly also in Germany, although they have recipes that are a little bit broader from the German-speaking world. And what they were extremely elegant cooking. They were the gourmet cuisine of their time. And the idea was that you could cook beautiful, beautiful food. And for the most part, except for the so-called Easter or Passover menu, they weren't, quote, Jewish dishes. They were just simply wonderful, it was wonderful food. But it was wonderful food that was okay for the Jewish kitchen. And I think of this 21st century, and it was very contemporary. It was contemporary to their time. And it was elegant, it was delicious. So in that way, I think of this as not just in the tradition of charity cookbooks or community cookbooks, but also in the tradition of the history of Jewish cookbooks all the way from the 19th century. So I think that's very, very, very interesting. Now, I have a question for the two of you, and that is, you have some favorite dishes from your grandmothers that never made it into the cookbook. And I want to know, Joy, what are some of your favorite from your childhood recipes? And do you wish they had made it into the cookbook?
You know, the funny thing is my mother, who is 91 years old, never fails when she sits down to my Shabbos table, which she has done every week for the last 6 months, says to me, I don't know how I got children who cook so well. And by which she means to say she was a terrible cook. Now, she wasn't a terrible cook, but this was just not in her. And yet on Friday night, you know, we always had chicken. And here's the recipe. Everybody get your pencils. It's very complicated. You take a cut up chicken, garlic powder, onion powder, and paprika. You stick it in the oven for at 350 degrees for as long as it takes, and that's chicken. So, but that's what we grew up with. And when we used to go to take my kids to my mother's for Shabbos, she would make it. And for years, my children's go-to desire was, can't we have grandma's chicken? And I would like, are you kidding? I just made, chicken marsala with, marsala from Spain. And, I'm getting all these, and you want grandma's chicken with the onion powder? Like, what is that about? But we all know what that's about, right? That was about being grandmas.
And where was your grandma born?
So my mother was born in the Bronx, but my grandmother was born in Warsaw. And I had the same experience, right? When I was growing up, she would boil chicken and we would have chicken soup and then we would eat boiled chicken. And to me, this was, I don't know, this was cuisine. This is because it was love in a pot. That's what it was, right?
Love in a pot. Well said. Now, Katja, what about in your case?
Well, I grew up in a family where cooking was the sport. My one side of my family had a Italian-American grocery store and were importers in Brooklyn. And the other side was Hungarian and Austrian. So I had unbelievable cakes and delicious cooking going on in a Hungarian way. But I grew up thinking we were Italian because my grandmother came to holidays with stuffed shells. And everybody in the family talked about sauce, like whose sauce was better, whose gravy was better than the next one. So it was really a sport. When my family gets together, we cook. And and as some people, search out the ultimate, my family searched out the ultimate tomato, the ultimate, so I grew up with a lot of cooks and everybody, my siblings all cook and our children cook. It's a family thing.
Well, actually,
and we all have memories of my sister for breakfast makes my grandmother Regina's blintzes, and we each, when we were got married and were setting out on our own, my grandmother gave us each a blintze pan, a specific speckled, and I was instructed, do not use this for anything else but blintzes. This is the pan. And then when Dorian took over making the blintzes, I gave her my speckled pan.
Wow. Well, in my case, my mother's side is from Brest-Litovsk, which today is in Belarus, but it was before the war, it was in Poland. And my father from Opatów, from a town in south central Poland. And it was my father's mother's cooking, my grandmother from my father's side, that I remember well. And she was a good cook, but absolutely traditional, completely traditional, but everything very flavorful, everything very fresh. And it would be all the things you would expect but what's very interesting is, I remember in an earlier conversation that, Joy, you said about this cookbook, no kugel. I mean, in other words, when you were trying to suggest how this cookbook would be different from other less interesting, community cookbooks, it was kugel. But actually, there are kugel contests also, and there's.
I noticed in the chat, Barbara, that Rabbi Nama Kelman is on our video, who is the dean of Hebrew Union College in Jerusalem. She happens to be in New York visiting her grandchildren, but she wanted to know: is it kugel or kigel?
It's
and
both.
Salt and salty or sweet. And you're an expert at this, Barbara.
It's both. It just depends on where you're from. But the solution to a mixed marriage is not to make the salt and the sweet in the same one. That's the only advice. That's the only advice.
Well, I have that with matzah. I have that with matzah bride. I grew up.
I can't stand it sweet.
I can't either. And my husband's family eats it sweet. So we have two pans going, because.
Never. Oh, that's a good solution. Now there's a solution. Okay, now what I wanted to do, I want to turn to something that I found very surprising and delightful, actually, about the cookbook. And that is the way that it begins. And it begins.
Oh, excuse me, Barbara. I do have to correct something because I do see it in the chat. what Katja said was that she was not doing the chicken breasts. She was only doing the salad of the chicken breast because she's making a milchik meal. I just want to be really clear about that. In the cookbook, it's a chicken paillard with several different salads depending on the season. But Katja's only making the salad. She's not making the chicken breast because you're quiet. You don't mix meat with milk. Sorry.
But that's an important point about our cookbook.
Yes.
We tell you all throughout it that this dressing is not only good like a tahini dressing, it's delicious on this fall salad, but it's also delicious drizzled over a roasted cauliflower or make it in another way. So that is what I'm doing. I love that salad with the roasted squash and toasted pumpkin seeds, so that I'm doing the salad without chicken in it.
Right, and actually
Parve.
What's wonderful about the recipes is that they are very easily adjusted for a meat meal, a dairy meal, whatever. It's very, very easy to adjust them to so that you're not mixing milk and meat. So one of the things that I found really delightful and surprising, interesting about the book is the way it begins. And that is, it doesn't begin with appetizers. It begins with challah. And which I think is a really, really interesting decision. I have some thoughts about it, but I wanted to ask Katja and then Joy about that choice. How did it happen, and why? How did it happen, and why do you think that it was a good idea?
Well, I would say from my perspective, as you introduced, Katja is she's not the official, she's the official challah, queen, priestess, I think I don't know, I should find a word, of the Upper West Side.
Queen's pretty good.
Around Jewish holidays, she could be making hundreds and sending them all over the world. I know that she's brought challahs to Israel for bar mitzvahs and to weddings. And I will say a personal memory, when my dad died, my doorman called me and said, "There's a bag here downstairs for you." It was a challah from Katja. It's so much the way she has inspired all of us to think about the way in which this very Jewish symbol unites all of us with love and care. So from my perspective, starting with challah, both represented this spirit that Katja and Judy and Lisa wanted to create in the book, and start with this is who we are. Katja, I don't know.
Yeah, and it's a symbol of community, breaking bread together. I mean, to bring people together and to sit down and to break bread together is what we tried to represent in the book. Community coming together, gathering around a table from wherever you come from, whatever your background, what you bring it to our table and break bread with us.
Well, I think it's absolutely a brilliant way to go. And there is a kind of, revival is the wrong word, but what I would say is that, of course, many people have been baking their own challah, but by and large, people buy a challah. And the beauty of actually making it, and making it as a family project involving kids in the making of it. But there are other, I would call them challah events, whether they're workshops or just simply the collective experience, and particularly women coming together and together baking challahs. That and it is very much about bread and baking bread, but also making it. I think the process. I
think yes. And right now, for instance, in the pandemic, I don't know if you've been hearing this, Katja, but the number of people making challah because they're home has increased exponentially. And Katja's recipe, which is actually, I guess, Dorian's recipe, it's not a grandmother recipe, right?
No.
From Santa Cruz or something, right?
Exactly. From a girl named Christine in Santa Cruz.
Yeah. B'Shem Amra. But in fact, it's gone viral, as I see from Jonathan Ornstein, who's also on this call from JCC Krakow. There are a lot of people making this recipe. And
And
it's,
I'll tell you something else about, of course, challah has, I guess, how shall I say? On the one hand, it's ancient. So we're dealing with a Jewish tradition that has enormous historical depth. It has great historical depth, great religious significance. It's also a glorious, wonderful bread. So just simply from a sensory, aesthetic, aspect, it's wonderful. And also, it's very creative. And by that I mean that there are great folk traditions in terms of creating special challahs for particular holidays, created challahs, and they were documented by folklorists and ethnographers, at the beginning of the 20th century. And we have really interesting photographs and diagrams of how to make a challah with a bird, with a key, with a ladder, how to make it a round challah, how to make a 12 braided challah. The possibilities, and people have become very, very inventive. And so we asked Katja if she would bake for us a challah for Sukkot. And she did. So I would like to invite Katja to please show us the challah and tell us about it.
So I baked two because it's easier to see how I made a lulav. Can everyone see that? You can see how it comes together without the seeds on it. So you could really see, you can see the palm fronds coming up the middle and the two different leaves coming on the sides, the myrtle and the different leaf shape. And then it's all brought together in braids and tied together like a lulav. And so I made one without seeds, but I prefer the creativity of seeds. So I also made another one with the seeds, so you can see how much fun you can have doing it.
It's so creative and so beautiful.
Yeah. And for each family event, like for weddings, I do two rings that overlap, and one is a braid that has dark seeds on it, and the other has light seeds on it, and then some za'atar. So it's like the bride and the groom uniting and adding the spice of za'atar for a life filled with excitement and spice.
Oh, it's absolutely, it's wonderful.
Yeah.
And it's so creative. I mean, on the one hand, even the traditional, what you might call the traditional challahs, were themselves very creative. Multiple braids, these decorations. I remember interviewing an old woman in Toronto in the 60s when I was doing some ethnographic research, and she showed me how to make these little challah birds that they would have, say, a little bit of challah dough left over, and she'd make a coil, she'd tie it in a knot, then she'd pinch out the beak, put two little peppercorns for the eyes, and then she had for all the kids, she had the little bird challahs. I mean, they're just, even within the tradition, there was a kind of creativity. And so to see that impulse, carried through in this
Right.
incredibly beautiful, loving way, and so appropriate for the holidays. So you can have a lulav challah, and then this, beautiful, Creole brisket, and some crostini, and yes, why not? It's who we are. And I'll tell you, Joy, I'm with you. Jewish is as Jewish does.
Katja, somebody is asking in the chat about using a convection oven for challah. She wants to know, can you, or should you just not?
I prefer if you have a convection oven that you can turn the convection oven on or off. I think it's better to put it in without the convection fan going, so that it rises properly for the first 15, 20 minutes, and then you can put the convection on so that it has a more even baking. But I prefer not to have the fan going because it sometimes interferes with the rising, at least in the convection ovens that I've used.
Yeah, exactly, because what the convection oven does is it forms the crust too quickly, and it means that holds
Exactly.
the dough won't rise properly. Yeah, that's exactly. So I think at this moment, I'd like to introduce the other two co-authors who were kind enough to join us. So if we could bring them up, that would be just great.
There's Lisa. I see
yes,
Lisa,
Lisa's
although I
there.
don't see your picture there.
Oh,
Hey,
Lisa, great. So while we're waiting, because I love that Katja
Oh no,
said
I can't
that,
hear Barbara.
I'm on.
Got you. I got you now.
Okay. So when Katja was talking with us about the project, she referred to the troika as the fork, knife, and spoon.
That's right.
I want to know who, Lisa, in that cutlery set, which one were you?
I was the knife.
And Lisa, why were you the knife?
Oh, there's
hi,
Judy.
Oh, hi, Judy. Hi.
You can take yourself off mute, Judy.
I was the knife, I guess, because when you get three women together talking about food, it can kind of continue on and on for quite a lot of time. And so it was up to me to kind of bring everybody back to point and to say, we've got to move through this. So I did a lot of we all edited together, but I would say that one of my roles was to keep us on task and to keep cutting so that we could actually finish this production.
In other words, you had to cut to the quick.
Exactly. Well said.
Wow. So now of the fork, knife, and spoon, Judy, what were you?
I was fork, maybe because I was constantly shoveling food in my mouth.
No.
Happily tasting everything that we were doing the test recipes for.
Okay, and so Katja, then that means that you had to have been the spoon.
Yeah, I was a spoon because I just kept cooking. And I think of Judy as the fork because she was always pushing us to tweak the taste, to get it right. Like just poke it a little better, get it, like make sure that it was really right. I know we enjoyed a lot of good meals, but I think Judy was always pushing us to get the taste exactly right, or not so much tarragon. She wanted
more salt.
So more salt, exactly. And Lisa was like, Judy and I were constantly bringing more recipes, and Lisa would be the knife in a way of like, okay, that's enough. We don't need any more cookie tests. No more.
Well, certainly Slime couldn't take any more cookie tests. So.
Well, actually, what strikes me is that your collaboration is also very much in the spirit of CC. And that is that you are very diverse. The three of you come from very different backgrounds, personal histories, different relationship, in fact, to cooking and food in terms professionally. But also, I think that the fruitfulness of the collaboration is itself a message, that you were able to work so effectively together, to be so complementary in terms of your sensibilities and your expertise. And I would say in the spirit of collaboration, which I think the book is a testament to that, and also very much in the spirit of the JCC itself. So you, Lisa, and to Judy is, were there any real surprises that arose out of this collaboration? Anything that came as a real surprise, Lisa?
I guess, I think that it's a very rare moment when you can meet up with your peers or your friends or your colleagues in this way, and being part of each other's lives week in, week out was something extremely rare and really very valuable. And, you know what goes on in a kitchen, right? You start schmoozing and tasting and schmoozing. And we really, I think, we spent about 3 years in each other's kitchens, and the support and the closeness was, of course, something that we hoped for, but I don't think we really understood the depth of what that experience bred in all of us, and the depth of our connections to each other and to each other's families.
Lovely. And Judy?
I agree with everything Lisa has said, and I would add, as you talked about, that the cookbook really expressed the full diversity of the JCC. It really was represented to a large degree with the three of us. I grew up in a superficially Jewish home, certainly I knew very little about kosher cooking. And I think you asked surprises. One of the surprises was how much I could learn from Lisa and from Katja, and how we shared each other's values in what cooking meant to our families within, for them, the Jewish continuity, but for me, food in general is an incredibly important part of my family life. But the book brought, I have to say, a lot more Jewish content into my family's kitchen. And for both my daughters, you know, starting their own homes, it's a big part of their homes now. And I have to thank Lisa and Katja, and of course, Joy and the JCC for reminding me how food really can bring a new level of Jewishness into a family life.
Well, that's very, very good to hear. And Katja, for you?
I think we didn't all know each other. I mean, I knew Lisa and I knew Judy, but they didn't know each other. And the way that we came together, and it was never drudgery. It was always an exciting day to be doing this together. And the joys, the book has a lot of pictures that were taken in Judy, even though we live in the city, Judy lives just in Riverdale. So she has a house and a backyard and a spectacular garden. And it was just, the whole thing was just an incredible celebration of living through cooking and our lives with each other. It was a wonderful, wonderful experience. And we really worked hard. We all felt committed to having this be something that you didn't want to put down, and that was beautiful. One of those cookbooks that people who don't cook read.
Yeah, I want to emphasize that. You know, I never thought about this, but if Katja was the spoon and Lisa was the knife and Judy was the fork, I was the plate. Which is to say, for a year, I went through the galleys of this cookbook, trying literally every recipe and calling them sometimes quite early in the morning or late at night and saying, this recipe doesn't make sense. There's too much of this. There's too little of that. But I guess what I want to emphasize is this is a cookbook for non-professional cooks. It's interesting, it's terrific, but the ingredients, you can all find them, and it's very super clear. So if you love to cook, you're going to love this cookbook, but it's not overwhelming. Everybody should just hear that although these ladies are extraordinary cooks, I wouldn't call them home cooks. The cookbook was really written for everybody who loves to cook.
And I understand that you cooked every single recipe.
Everything. Some things I had to farm out. As you said, my husband doesn't like peppers, so that paprikash recipe, which I think was Judy's, was Nick's grandmother's or something. I mean, some of these foods, you know, did come from these families, but then got a modern
twist.
That's right.
Yeah, absolutely. It was very clear. Well, I think that at this moment, it's time for us to open the discussion and invite questions and give you the opportunity to respond. So I'd like to keep everybody up. Lisa, Judy, Katja, Joy, I'd like to keep all of you up. And let's see what questions we're getting now from our distinguished visitors.
I've got two questions for you. One of the questions is, what is your favorite fish recipe in the book? And the question is to all the ladies.
Okay, so let's see. Let's maybe start. Let's start. Judy, we'll start with you, and then we'll go to Lisa, to Katja, and to Joy.
Hands down, the fish tacos. I love those fish tacos. It's a fun recipe to cook. It's very communal when you put all the ingredients out and people can choose which ones they want to include. it becomes festive, even if it is just a regular gathering. That's my favorite fish recipe.
And Lisa?
That's hard. I think I really love the steamed salmon with chard, which is like a very simple go-to weeknight, perfect kind of fish where the fish is just tender and flaky and it comes with a little sauce. You can use that sauce on vegetables. You can put it over rice, and it's just a very, it's a real go-to recipe, I think.
Lovely. Katja?
Well, those two are two of my favorites. We made the fish tacos. I think we made it weekly all through my younger children's high school days when we finished this cookbook. But I also love, and I was never a absolute lover of gefilte fish, and every year my grandmother would make it, and then my mother-in-law made it. But there's a salmon halibut gefilte fish that I make even not for Passover or specific holidays. It's delicious with a beet apple horseradish.
Whoa, it sounds great. And you know, it's interesting, in the Pacific Northwest of the United States, they do make, I mean, they have in the charity cookbooks from that region, their gefilte fish is made with salmon. And so
with salmon?
It's pink. Can you imagine two-tone pink gefilte fish with beet horseradish? I actually think that's a winner. I think there's potential there. Joy?
Beautiful.
It's the halibut with Marcona almonds. It's grilled, and you're supposed to use figs, but here's a place where when I can't find figs, I don't know, ladies, tell me if this was okay. I use plums.
Why not?
Perfect.
Why not?
I like it.
Okay, so now, thank you. That all of them sound great, and that they're not the only recipes that use fish in the cookbook, but they all sound wonderful. So now the question had to do with the impact or the influence of Polish cuisine on Ashkenazi cuisine. I would really, if you'll forgive me, I would take the liberty of reformulating the question, and that is, it would have to do with not the influence of one on the other, which suggests that Jewish cuisine is derivative, that somehow or other it is what it is because other cuisines made it what it is. I would reformulate the question as, what does Polish, what is the cuisine of Polish Jews? And then, and what you would, my starting point would be, what do they share? They share climate, they share raw ingredients, they share certain technologies in terms of, ovens and stoves. They share the seasons. And so what interests me are, if you will, the variations and permutations on dishes that they share. And so it's not a matter of who influenced whom and which was the original and which was borrowed, etc. I don't think of it that way at all. So, whether we're talking about borscht, or we're talking about carp, or we're talking about pierogi or knedlach or kreplach, or whatever we may be talking about, I'm more interested in understanding these cuisines as living together and as being what I would call symbiotic, that they are in a constant dialogue, and that these communities are adapting to local circumstances and to each other. So the shared repertoire is amazing, and then the variations are really interesting. And a good place to look, honestly, is the Polish Christmas Eve meatless dinner, and you'll see a lot of connections there, among other places. So that's where I'd go with that question. Okay, do we have another question? Okay, so let me ask this. Do our panelists want to ask each other any questions?
What's the next cookbook, ladies?
I can't believe you're asking us that.
Do you know how many times we've talked about writing another cookbook?
Really?
With a few caveats, mind you, but.
And I'm curious that if indeed you were, because I'm assuming that as you think about doing, quote, another one, you have some thoughts on what it might be. What are some of the thoughts on what it might be?
I'm going to go out on a limb here. Joy, I'll apologize in advance, but, and to my two co-authors. You had mentioned, Barbara, early on about inclusion of bacon in something. And not that I was suggesting including bacon, but I did want to have a sidebar in some of the recipes about if you don't keep a kosher home. And it generated a really meaningful and very interesting conversation amongst all of us. And if I was to write another cookbook with these two amazing women, I might push a little harder for a sidebar. I got voted down on that one, but it really brought to me the importance of a kosher home for Katja and Lisa in a beautiful way, and Joy as well, in a beautiful way that is not something I follow, but it helped me develop a very different and enlightened, I should say, respect for the homes that they keep and the traditions that they all keep. But you know,
can I ask you guys,
bolognese?
Can I ask you, like, is there something that you have learned about food since, I mean, the book has been out now for, I don't know,
5
more
years.
than 5, right?
No,
Maybe
2015,
5.
5 years.
Right, 5 years. So are you cooking any differently? Judy, your garden has grown exponentially. Katja, you now have a farm. Are there different ways that you're thinking about food than you originally thought about it? Or it's just it's on the same trajectory?
Well, I think, if I can go, I think everyone always thinks of the year as 4 seasons, and there is it's really 6 seasons, and there's a cookbook that Judy and I have, I think Lisa might have it too, that was written discussing how it's 6 seasons. And I think we debated about having the book be according to season and what's available now. So I think that might be something that would come into the framework of how we would do it. But it's also still the same message as what the first cookbook is, which is what we're cooking now. I mean, everything keeps evolving, and you keep coming up with different and new ideas and different influences constantly, especially with the internet.
For me, one change would be that, as you know, we have stories from JCCs across the country and their associations with food. I think if we were to do the book now, I would go globally. And I would go to the JCC in Warsaw. I would go to the JCC in Krakow. I would go to JCC in Israel. And then we, of course, have to travel to these places.
We're ready to take you.
But I think the stories are such a rich part of the cookbook.
Absolutely. If I just might say that JCC Warsaw, one of its most popular and most successful programs is Boker Tov, which is an all-day Sunday brunch. And when I say that kosher is very inclusive, needless to say, vegetarian is even more so, and vegan even more so. And so they go with the most inclusive, which is to say meatless, kind of cuisine, and they get a beautiful turnout, and people hang out there all day, and they serve this really kind of an Israeli style meze kind of menu, buffet kind of menu all day long. And I think it'd be a beautiful idea to do JCC Global. I just think that would be stunning. And I know that the JCC in Krakow also does all kinds of interesting food programming, and their Sabbath dinners with 600 plus people gathered together on one Friday night during the Krakow Jewish Culture Festival is just phenomenal. And I know that they've also done challah workshops, and
I think Keisha cooks for that festival, right?
That's right, exactly.
Somebody wants to know whether you invented these recipes or you tweaked existing ones.
And if we can, just before that, Lisa, I just wanted to get what you would imagine in a new cookbook, and then we can go to the
Oh.
question that Joy read.
Well, I know Katja and I have talked about a Shabbat dinner cookbook. But I think, I mean, even Shabbat dinner around the world would kind of be very interesting if we tried to coordinate or, combine a lot of the different ideas that we're talking about. Because, Shabbat dinner is just a time to bring diverse people into your home. And that's a concept that works for anyone. It doesn't have to be Shabbat. It doesn't have to have a religious significance to it. It's just a great excuse to bring people together regularly. And I think, particularly now during the pandemic when we're missing that kind of connection so much, I think we could combine a lot of these different ideas and come up with something really great. So
Yeah, I think that's
I'm
also,
really sorry, but I'm going to have to sign off. But I want to thank you so much for letting me be part of this. This was a great walk down memory lane and got me very excited and whetted my appetite, so to speak. So thank you guys. Love to everyone, and Shana Tova, wishing everyone health and happiness.
thank you very much, Lisa.
See you, Lisa.
So now, but just before we sign off, Joy, is there a question that had come from you or a point you before?
I think there was just a question about whether these recipes are all new or whether they were tweaked from existing recipes.
I think both. I think the answer is both.
Yeah.
I think the answer is both. So now turning to Elise and Magda, I think that if I'm not mistaken, you want to bring us to a close?
Well, we don't want to bring it to a close, but I'm afraid that we might have to. First of all, thank you all so much for coming together with Tish, Magda, Barbara. You are an amazing Kochlöffel. If we have the fork, knife, and spoon, you're definitely that big kitchen spoon that stirs us all, and we're very grateful that you've set such a beautiful table for all of us. I don't think there's anyone on the call who wants to let go of the connection, and I'm sure that many people will find their way to the cookbook and have been inspired to think about community and how we cook and eat and share food together. Really, I can't thank you enough on behalf of TJHT Tours Talks. And I'm so delighted that we've been able to partner with Tish this year and look forward to many more partnerships. I would like to give you a little hint that if you tune in on Friday, you will get to see rainbow challah being braided by the JCC in cooperation with Tish. Am I right?
Yes, you're right. And also, I wanted to tell you that all the events, all the online events of Tish are available with English subtitles, so you can watch everything and you can join us during all the days of Tish.
Yes, and I think that one of the things that this year Tish has been exemplary is to provide all programming in Polish and English. The English language programming debuts in English, but then it is rebroadcast with Polish subtitles because it takes time for the museum to prepare the Polish subtitles. So if you want them with Polish subtitles, just look for the rebroadcast in the TISH Food Festival program. And as for the Polish programming, if it's YouTube, there's a closed caption option and you can choose the language English and it'll automatically bring up English subtitles. So we are a bilingual museum. It's very, very important for us to be able to communicate fully in both Polish and English and to bring our Polish and English language audiences together. So I personally want to thank the Toby Center in Warsaw for partnering with Polin Museum. We are enormously grateful to you for your cooperation. I want to thank Kuba especially for providing all the technical support, and Elise for leading this entire center. And I want to thank Magda, who I think has created our food programming for Polin Museum with great imagination and is doing a wonderful job on the TISH Food Festival. Done so beautifully and with such imagination. So, and of course, I want to thank our guests. I want to thank Katja. I want to thank Joy. I want to thank the fork, the knife, the spoon, and the plate. Thank you very, very much. I thought this was a wonderful session. I cannot thank you.
Thank you all. Shana
Thank you
Tova.
all. Shana
Thank you very
Tova.
much.
A good year, and we hope to see you on our next session in 2 weeks. And by the way,
My
when you start
faculty is that
on
way. Bye,
the
Judy.
global tour to create the recipes, we're here to greet you.
Yeah, and
Thank you.
you'll all receive a message with follow-up resources.
Absolutely.